Good morning, kids, and welcome back to another video of Fox Flicks on Popcross Studios. Today we're checking out a video just simply called My Singing Monsters Paid Me to Draw This for Them. So that's why he's been doing so much My Singing Monster content. Alright, well, let's see what it is that they paid him to draw.
That's right, the reason I've been doing a bunch of different My Singing Monsters videos this month is because the My Singing Monsters team asked me to be the very first guest artist to design the new loading screen to be in the game for the full month of their next Month of the Mythical event. And in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down my design process for this piece and giving a bunch of insight into how I draw and design monsters or redesign monsters, and hopefully give lots of other aspiring artists out there who like drawing beasties some good tips and inspiration. Even though now I'm starting to focus a lot more on story-focused episodes with my new mythology series Mytholethal and my new superhero-inspired series Vigilance, and I'll actually be announcing a new monster-focused series today at the end of the video revolving around the narrator and the world of my My Singing Monsters More Monstrous series. But given the art the My Singing Monsters team hired me to make for them and that it's some of the best art I've ever made, I figured doing a design process episode could be a good change for today.
Yeah,
so I'm excited to talk about this stuff, and we're going to start off by going over the composition and what goes into planning out a piece like this. So let's get into it, shall we?
Let's go! Hit like,
Hit like
if you want. Subscribe if you feel like it. By the way, enjoy the show. Man, I want
Now, something that some people might not realize is that doing a piece with, say, 3 creatures in it is actually more difficult than doing 3 individual drawings of those same creatures. Because when you're putting multiple characters into one piece, you have to figure out a composition that makes sure to highlight all of those characters and doesn't have them too overlapping each other, but also makes it feel like they're all still a part of the same piece and world. And luckily I've actually been practicing that more lately, doing some bigger pieces, like in my first few Mytholethal episodes, and I did a Multiverse Tales episode recently in which I had 2 characters fighting, so I have been practicing multi-character composition a bit more recently, and that definitely helped with this. But this piece had an extra complicated layer to it, which is that, for one thing, they needed the My Singing Monsters logo at a specific place front and center for the loading screen, and 2, there needed to be I needed to make sure that none of the creature's important parts would be hidden behind, say, the loading bar that would be popping up on the loading screen and the big blue bubble logo. And then on top of that, there is also the fact that this loading screen needed to work in a bunch of different framings, because the My Singing Monsters game can be played on multiple different devices, and something like an iPad has very different framing from a longer iPhone or something like that. Luckily, they sent me a template that had the My Singing Monsters logo in the place they needed it to be in, and they had different framing options, so I kept those on screen with the loading bar on screen and stuff, and just decreased the opacity so that they could be there and I could use them as reference as I was trying to figure out how to have all of these creatures fit. The creature...
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he do that monster in like one of the first of these videos?
That they were having me draw were brand new rare versions of the Anglo, Hiahaha, and Shrubble, all of which were designed by My Singing Monsters superfans Eric, Chris, and Quinn as a part of the Ultimate Creator program that My Singing Monsters has done. And that's one thing that, this is a side tangent thing, but that's something that really resonates with me about the My Singing Monsters team, is that they do a really great job incorporating and communicating with their community, which is something that I've always tried to do on this channel as well, with things like my monthly community redraws. Which, by the way, there will be a brand new one announced at the end of this episode. So if you want to try to get your own creatures made more monstrous by me, make sure to listen till the end. But anyway, I was super excited by the designs I was getting to work with. I just
realized that thing has a lot of banana. Oh my lord, I just realized. Bananas.
Done a more monstrous Hiahaha before, but that obviously wasn't actually the rare one. But there was one last thing that I needed to factor in when I was coming up with the composition, which was probably, I mean, none of this was really stressful, but if any part was stressful, it was probably the composition part, because that was really the thing that would define how this piece ended up turning out. And the last things to consider were what was going to go over the My Singing Monsters logo. Obviously, I couldn't have so much that it was making us unable to read it, but I did notice that in past loading screen examples, there was almost always something covering the O in My Singing Monsters, and there would sometimes be other creatures, like parts of their bodies going in front of the logo, so I wanted to have a little bit of that. And I noticed that the rare Anglo has this ball that kind of sits on its tongue. So I thought, well, that's perfect. I already knew
Perfect.
that for this composition, I wanted to have the rare Anglo kind of wrapping some of its tentacles and its arm claw things that stick out of its head coming around and in front of the logo. So having that ball come up and sit right in front of the O was just, I thought that was perfect. And I also made sure that, well, the two characters on the sides, the rare Shrubble and the rare Hyahaha, I knew their full bodies weren't going to fit in the smallest framing option, but I knew I
yeah.
had to make sure to at least have their heads in the smallest version, the main focal
At
point
least
of
the
each of the
heads.
creatures. So after some finessing and moving things around, I finally got a framing that I was really happy with, and then I could move on to start roughing out the details. Now, while this piece is different from the stuff I usually draw for reasons I've talked about,
Okay.
and we'll talk more about later, I draw
He is right. This is, of course, a brand new like style of video for them, but still, we get amazing art like always.
in 4 distinct stages most of the time. One is the basic pose and layout, which we just saw, where I was blocking out just thick, usually bluish kind of color blocks to pose out the characters. Then the rough details, which we're going into now, and then I'll go into inking, and then finally shading and lighting. Now for the rough details stage, I'm not doing a refined image yet or any refined line work. That's what I'll get into when we go to inking. But I am figuring out the main design of the character now and its final proportions. I'll often change some things from whatever I blocked out in the more basic roughing out stage before. And if you were to go back about 3 years on this channel, you'd see that the first stage of drawing I used to do, I also used to do with line work, and then I would lower the opacity of that and do another layer of rough details. And I
Yeah.
eventually just realized that I really liked doing the color blocks as the sort of doing a silhouette of the character as the first stage, because then I wasn't dealing with
It's good, but it's also a little tricky. I tried to do it myself, and I just couldn't get it to walk.
2 layers of line work. So when I got into the line work in the stage that we're in right now, I wasn't confusing myself by doing slightly more refined lines over rougher lines and then going into inking, doing that layer again. And doing a silhouette first, I think really helps give you a better understanding of what the most important parts of your drawing are going to look like in the final piece.
Oh, I just realized that thing is biting through the My Singing Monsters logo.
In terms of just the really rough thumbnail. Now,
Okay.
another thing I was thinking about for this is I wasn't going into it in the exact same way I go into my Singing Monsters More Monstrous drawings, because in those, while I don't always change up the design much, I am redesigning those characters to fit into a fantasy monster series. So sometimes there are things that I feel very inclined to change.
Oh,
like when I
it's a
did
slug.
my version of the Hyahaha, instead of having bells on its head, I turned those into spikes. Or sometimes if I just feel like it, I'll give a creature a tail or something. In this, I wasn't really changing anything because I wasn't making these guys more monstrous exactly. I was kind of just drawing them in my art style. So I'm making
Which
them
is
more
perfectly fine.
proportionally similar to how I like to draw characters,
Wait, is this thing like based off the Sea Bunny?
and maybe like adding a few more teeth here or there. But for the most part, I wanted to make sure to keep it as true to the originals as possible while still doing it in my style and giving it my kind of flair. And even though I wasn't redesigning these creatures much, I still did the same thing that I always do when drawing any monsters, which is referencing real-world animals. Whatever animal I think it's most similar to, I'm referencing. So for the Hyahaha, on my other monitor, I'll have up images of wolves and like snarling wolves or dogs or
Jackals?
different kinds of hounds, hyenas, things like that.
Hyenas,
For
yeah.
the Shrubble, I'd have images up of slugs and snails so I can get an idea of what those look like in real life and what kind of textures they have on them. And for the Anglo, I was obviously referencing things like octopus and
Crabs,
squids
octopi,
and
yeah.
some crabs as well. And that is my biggest tip for anyone that wants to get into designing monsters and creatures is study real-world animal anatomy. I've talked
Always
a
have
bunch
a
of times on the
reference.
channel before
Like
about how I
always.
personally took a course that you can find on both Skillshare or Udemy by a guy named Jeffrey Jacobs. I can link it in the
Udemy,
description,
Udemy.
but honestly, there's probably
I don't know what I came from. Just something popped in my head, just screaming Udemy.
tons of different courses on there. I did that
Oh,
one
on
over a
Udemy?
decade ago.
Eh.
But it is super helpful to learn how to do real-world animal anatomy, because from there you can just do so many different combinations and changes to create any fantasy monster that, I mean, not exists, but that you can imagine. Now, like I said, this
Next.
is usually where I'd move into the inking after the rough detailing is done, where I do my refined line work. But
Yeah.
as I said, this drawing is a little bit different of a beast to tackle than some other things because we've got parts of creatures in front of the logo, behind the logo. So I'm doing things
And
in a
apparently
slightly
through the
different
logo?
order. What I'm doing right now is going in and inking and then just putting in the flat colors for anything that's in front of the logo. So the Hyaha's head and one of its hands that's kind of reaching over the logo, and some of the rare Anglo's arms and its tongue, tentacle, the ball that sits on its tongue. And I'm doing those in their own layers and folders because I wanted to make sure that
okay.
both I and the My Singing Monsters team had some freedom after the drawing was finished to move things around. So if we wanted to repose a character slightly, we could just take that character's folder and inch them over to the left or right or whatever needed changing. It turned out we didn't
Yeah.
end up needing to change anything, except
good.
one goofy little thing that was my bad, but we'll get to that
Oh.
later. But it was still better to have the freedom to be able to change things just in case.
Oh, hold on. We'll be right back. And we're back.
And I get through all the inking for the parts in front, and then I put in the flat colors, but I don't do the shading and lighting on those yet, because I wanted to do the full Anglo's rendering at once and the full Hyaha's rendering at once. I probably could have just done the shading and lighting for those parts of the creatures now, but I decided to do the creatures one at a time. Again, this
It's
is
fine.
not my usual process for doing things, but different projects sometimes require to change things up a little bit. So then after all of that, I went on to doing just the full Shrubble, because it was the one that was kind of the easiest to do.
I think I get the name. Shrub and Trouble. Or Treble.
Not just
However you pronounce
because,
it.
you know, design-wise, it felt like it was a little bit easier. It didn't actually have any limbs, unless you count the harp thing sticking out of its back as a limb.
Yeah,
but
I
also,
would.
mainly because all of its body was behind the logo. There was nothing in front of it, so I wasn't doing it in separate sections, except, of course, for when I realized that, it has those little floaty guys that I think are called charms that fly around it. Those
Oh.
I also did in their own separate layers, and I ended up being very glad that I did that because I do end up moving one of them down a bit because I realized I'd drawn it with
Which
like
one?
half of its body hidden in behind the Big Blue Bubble logo. So later on I just tweak it, move it down a little bit, and
Oh,
then even
probably
in a
that
different
one.
version of the
Uh,
drawing which
this
doesn't have
one.
the logo, I ended up moving it again because I thought compositionally it looked better. But again, I gave myself the freedom, and I did end up getting to
Yeah, you could just go.
get some benefit out of that. My only little uncertainty with the rare Shrubble was what texture to do the leafy kind of stuff around its back. I mean, I was thinking that it was kind of like a shrubbery. A shrubbery! And so I decided to texture it in a similar way to how I would do trees or bushes in the backgrounds of any of my Fantasy Beast drawings.
Thing is, I think it's like half based off the sea bunny, and those things are more. I guess you could technically say fluffy eeled, but I'm not sure.
Which, when you kind of sit and stare at it, it doesn't look fantastic, but when it's part of a bigger piece, I think it looks really nice, and I think the Shrubble with that texture mixed with some of the sort of slimy textures that I add from referencing things like slugs and snails and how they don't have scales, but they have, I don't know, a sort of texture to them that I add a little bit of that onto its body as well.
you say, like,
and all of those
bumpy or
things
something?
combined, all the different textures, I think make this end up looking really nice. Although one thing I do partway through the drawing is the parts of it that are in behind the logo and the Anglo, I end up adding a bit of a purple fade onto them to make them disappear a little bit more into the
Disappear.
background. Because with just the full bright colors of it directly behind the Anglo and the logo, it feels like it's drawing a little bit too much attention, so I was kind of adding some exaggerated atmospheric perspective to it, knowing that the background was going to have a lot of purple to it, but obviously don't put any of that on the part that I want to be very prominent of that character showing, like its head or anything that's not being blocked by another creature. Now, after the
It's
rare
fine.
Shrubble was finished, I moved on to the rare Hyahaha, and I was super excited about this one, even though, again, I have drawn a Hyahaha before.
Huh.
This being the rare version of it was a lot of fun, and I
I'll be honest, I really like that that thing's name. The rare Hihaha.
really like when I get to tackle any creature that has a bunch of fur to it. People who are avid subscribers and followers of this channel know that around 6 months ago or so when I did one of my famous cartoon characters as werewolves videos, or famous dogs as werewolves videos.
Oh, I remember
finally
that.
figured out a fur rendering technique that I really liked. So now anytime I get to do a creature that has a lot of fur to it, it's pretty easy to make it end up looking pretty cool because just doing that same texturing pattern works really nicely. And it's especially nice
Loves
when a
the
creature
fall.
has a bunch of fur and then some kind of other texture to it, which this one has. I mean, it's mostly furry, but it's got other stuff as well. And I like the design element of the banana head. That was a fun change, and it helped even more that this creature is my favorite color combination. Purple and yellow. People have asked me a
Oh,
bunch of times if
yeah,
I have
okay.
a favorite color. I guess I'd say purple, but mostly I have favorite color combinations, and my two favorites are purple and yellow together. I absolutely love, so obviously love the rare Yahaha here, and
Always
then
good.
also pink and black, which black technically not a color, but whatever. Pink and
Yeah.
black is also another combination that I really like. But so for the Yahaha here, it was fun to do the texturing on its fur and the sort of cotton fluff that's kind of coming out from its neck and part of its sides. Its stitching is kind of coming undone a little bit, which is a really cool element. And then in the roughing stage, I didn't mention this
Oh, I guess it is like based semi off like a doll or something.
then, but I also thought I'd made its pose a little bit too boring, so then I decided to have one of its feet kind of kicking up a little bit, and it's looking down and seeing that it's sort of like it's stepping around one of the rare Anglo's tentacles, which is something you won't be able to see if you're on, I think, the iPad version, because its leg is kind of cropped out. But if you look at the art being used for promo or on one of the wider screens, then you'll be able to see that full thing. And then for
I
the
like
rare
it.
Anglo, which was the one that my whole premise for the composition of this one was based around it being behind the piece and kind of reaching up and around. That's the one where I kind of goofed something up a little bit. Important note for anyone when you're doing any kind of commission work or work for a client. I don't do a lot of this. I almost never take commissions. I took
Hey,
this
it's
one
fine.
because it was a very special occasion where I'm a big fan of My Singing Monsters. They're a big fan of my versions of their creatures. So I was like, okay, this is one that I'm definitely not going to turn down. But if you do
Sign me
end
up.
up doing any commission work or work for clients, I highly recommend that you always over-communicate. Even if you think you have a silly or stupid question, just ask it anyway, because you never want to spend a lot of time working
Okay, so that finally answers my thing. It's not biting through the sign.
on something just to realize it's not what the client wants, because either you're going to have to spend a lot of time redoing it, or you're going to end up delivering something that isn't what the client actually wanted, and you're probably going to lose that relationship and not be able to work with them again in the future.
Downfall.
That didn't happen here, but what happened is I should have asked if they also needed a version without the logo, because I was purely designing this thing to have that logo in place. But it turned out they did want a version without the logo as well to use for, like, on the App Store. They're using this as promotion as well, which is super cool. But in that version, they didn't want the logo in it. But this really did not end up being a big deal at all, because, I mean, for one, because I'd done everything on so many different layers, it was super easy to go in and add something else in between and around the different layers and to pop the
Thank
logo out,
Lord.
because I hadn't actually drawn anything attached to that logo. It was its own separate layer. So, of course, I didn't actually find this out until I'd done a finished version with the logo in there. So the last thing I did after I quote-unquote finished the Anglo, or at least, without anything in behind the logo, I went in and I added a super basic background inspired by the Mythical Island. And I knew that I
Nice,
didn't want
nice.
to. I mean, for one thing, the main thing that I really like doing is drawing creatures and characters. I can do backgrounds, but I've basically gotten to a point where my backgrounds are good enough to look cool with my creatures and characters and to help emphasize them.
It's all
But
about the
my
characters.
specialty isn't backgrounds, and I had also made the creatures so completely filling the frame that I knew I had to go with just super basic version of the background. So I
Simple.
looked at the Mythical Island, took just the most simple elements of it, had it just be a round platform beneath them, and really most of what we're seeing is the starry sky in behind them, which is something I already really like the look of. And because the rare
This is still
Yahaha
nice.
is purple, and the background for the Mythical Island is kind of a bit of a teal to purpley black kind of fade, I literally just color picked that from the image that I was referencing, but then I
Okay.
darken it down way more to make sure the purple of the background still has enough contrast with the purple of the Hyahaha. And then once I just whipped in some last little details,
name is really
making a
fun
few
to
changes
say.
here and there, I got to a finished version
And
of the
there
piece
it
with the
is.
logo in there that I was super happy with. And given that the My Singing Monsters team is a fan of my Singing Monsters More Monstrous series,
Love
I was
it.
feeling pretty confident that they were going to like it as well. So I sent it over to them, and they were stoked about it. They said it was looking awesome. They were really happy about it. But also that is when they mentioned the thing about needing a version without the logo in behind. No big deal, I said, so I jumped in and started doing the rest of the Anglo
No big deal, I can do it in a snap.
that had been rendered out behind the logo, and also changed the Hyahaha's hand that had been, or its claw
longer
that had
grabbing
been
it.
on the logo.
No
Because
longer
obviously,
grabbing it.
having its hand just up on nothing wouldn't really make any sense. But that arm was not super detailed and rendered anyway because it had mostly been behind the logo. So I just kind of chopped that part off of it and had its arm kind of up a little bit more to help emphasize that it's kind of trying to balance itself while standing over one of the rare Anglo's tentacles. With rendering out the rest of the rare Anglo's body, it was really easy because compositionally I had essentially already planned what it would look like, because I had one of its mouths
Right there.
going a little bit over the logo and one of its mouths going a little bit below the logo. So filling all that in was really just a matter of just blocking in the rest of the character and making sure to color and texture it in
Exactly,
the same way
yeah.
as its bottom and top half, so that it all blended together and didn't look like two separate chunks of creature. It all looked like one thing.
Oh, hold on, we'll be right back. And we're back.
Was
To
that, and
finish
the
this.
art was done. We can take a look at it here, and I don't know which, I think I might like the version without the logo better. I'm not totally sure. I
It's
really
fine
like
with me.
both versions. Again, I originally planned it to be with the logo, but I also like just seeing the
Look at the real Yahaha. It's actually got a chipped tooth.
full rendering and the texturing on these creatures, just them standing there on their own, just my artwork. I think that's super cool looking, but either way, I'm super happy with both pieces turned out. The My Singing Monsters team asked for no
Yes.
changes after that, and now you can officially see this art in the game and up on the App Store, being used on their socials as promotional art, and even in the game they've given me an official
Perfect.
shout out as a creator, and they've linked to a bunch of my Singing Monsters videos, which even at the time that I'm recording this has already given me a big uptick in views on my channel. So overall, this
Love
was
it.
just a super fun process. I'm so glad this video's finally out, and that for the next month, you're all gonna get to see my art in the actual My Singing Monsters game.
Congratulations, man. Big props.
I am just so happy about how this piece turned out, and obviously it's that much better that the My Singing Monsters team was really happy about it too. Huge thank you to Jen, Tyson, and David, and everyone over at the My Singing Monsters team for hiring me to do this project. And huge thank you to the My Singing Monsters community for embracing the My Singing Monsters art that I've made so much. If it wasn't for all of you watching and getting the video
I personally was never a huge fan of the games. It's nothing against them. They're just not for me. But the guy's artwork makes it all worth it.
passed around more, the My Singing Monsters team might not have even seen it, and this wouldn't have happened. If you haven't seen my Singing Monsters More Monstrous episodes, or maybe even my newest My Singing Monsters Superheroes episode,
I did
I'll
see
link a
that one.
playlist with all of my best My Singing Monsters stuff in it, including a compilation of my first 6 My Singing Monsters More Monstrous episodes. And as I said, I do have
wow.
a new original series starting up set in that universe, which was actually voted on by my subscribers, called The Summoner's Beasts. Because
Ooh.
Tayron is a beast summoner, he's going to be going around and finding the perfect team of beasts to summon for a big threat that's coming to his universe.
Yes.
And as I've done every month for over 5 years now, I'm doing a community redraw event for the month of June, in which I'll be adapting some subscriber-submitted art into this very storyline. So for anyone listening and interested in participating, what I want you to do is to create your own kind of cute monster creature. Something like you would
Wait,
see in My
cute?
Singing Monsters or in Pokemon or
Oh,
something like that.
okay.
You can even tell me in the description if you want it to be a monster of song. But don't make your design too creepy or monstrous, because as I do in my Singing Monsters More Monstrous series, I'm going to take the creatures that some of you submit and make them into more monstrous fantasy beasts.
And of course, it would be difficult to take a monster that's already a monster and make it even more monstrous.
Instructions will be up on screen, and the email
Without
that you
making
can
it look
submit
like
to will
go-
be linked in
full
the description
submission.
Make sure to submit before the deadline, and please do not submit any AI-generated art. No matter your skill level, I want to see what you can make, not what an AI program can make. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course we're ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote by Carol Dweck, who says that when you have a growth mindset, challenges are seen as exciting and not threatening. So instead of thinking, oh, if I try to face this challenge, I'm going to expose my weaknesses, you instead think, wow, this is a fantastic opportunity for growth. Looking at any challenge that way can really help you go into it with a lot more gusto and oomph. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday, which is this month's Popcross Community Redraw, redrawing some subscribers by Unites. It's a pretty great story, too. I'm excited for you all to hear it.
Oh, and I guess that's the end of it. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I want you all to remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below, and I'll see you kids next time when we flick back on. This is Fox, signing out. Peace.